Hello everybody and welcome to Nathan on Shuffle. This is my latest album spotlight video where I spotlight a brand new Prog album, and today we're talking about The Zealot Gene by legendary Prog band Jethro Tull, who've been around over 50 years if you can believe it, and have such a long and storied career. So this is their brand new album and I'm excited to talk about it today. I hope you guys appreciate the show. So first of all, Jethro Tull probably is going to be a band familiar to many of you. I've been delving deep into their catalog. I've been talking about it on the last several shows. If you watch my New Music Friday videos and such, I'm planning a big Jethro Tull album rankings, which should be coming out next week. I'm hoping where I've been listening to their entire catalog and ranking where their albums fit for me, just personal preference, nothing official or, objective in any way. This is just my own subjective opinion, but it means that I've been immersing myself into the world of Jethro Tull, when before I was mostly familiar with the very set period of like 70s prog albums from like Aqualung to like Songs from the Wood type era. But beyond that, I hadn't really heard a lot of their albums, especially ones beyond like Stormwatch. The ones from the 80s and beyond are just albums I had never even heard before. I just wasn't really interested in checking out because I thought those would be from periods that wouldn't be too interesting to me. But with this new album coming out, I thought it would be an opportune time to explore that period of the band. And so that will be explored on that album rankings type show. I'm going to talk about my experience listening to those albums. But that leads us to the point of now with the Zealot Gene, which is their first album in quite some time. Their last album was the Christmas album that they put out in 2003, which is like 19 years ago. And before that was jtoll.com, which came out in 1999. So really been a long time since they've done a Jethro Tull album. What's interesting though is that there have been Ian Anderson solo records, notably Homo Eroticus was not too long ago that he came out with that solo album, which features pretty much the same lineup that we have here. So there's kind of a question of what's considered Ian Anderson solo and what's considered Jethro Tull. Are they kind of one and the same? Is it just a difference in name only, or is there some tangible thing that kind of sets them apart? It's hard to say, but I think from what I've heard from interviews with Ian Anderson, it's kind of like Homo Eroticus probably could have been considered a Tull record. It just wasn't at the time. And as Ian Anderson has kind of thought over things and decided to kind of bring the band back into focus, I think that's kind of made him decide to consider this a Jethro Tull album instead, and probably works better for like marketing reasons and just, it's a name with probably bigger notoriety. And I think this album kind of harkens back to a lot of their classic sound with Jethro Tull, so I think it kind of fits in that manner. So it's kind of nebulous, the differences between Ian Anderson solo versus Jethro Tull, but as long as the music's good, does it even really matter what it's called, I guess? Basically, I really appreciate this album. I think it's a really solid album. I don't think it's up to the heights of like their 70s output, would be my take. But I think it's really strong compared to a lot of their post-70s material. Because it feels really classic sounding. Like a lot of those albums through the 80s and 90s, they were trying to pull in a lot of modern sounds and to various effects. Sometimes it was more successful and sometimes not. But I feel like they're really kind of hearkening back to their roots in a sense. And I think it actually plays in the album's favor because it evokes that classic Tull feel. The one thing that's a little different now, I think Ian Anderson's voice is not quite what it used to be in the 70s, and he kind of employs this a little bit like talk singing kind of style. I'm not sure how to describe it, but it's not quite as strong of a voice as it used to be. And so, but he's able to bring the expression in different ways through kind of this almost conversational style that he's adopted in more recent years. So I think it works, but I do miss it a little bit. I do miss some of the stronger vocal melodies that usually would have come back in earlier Tull records. I understand that that's just not how it is now, so we're going to get what we get here. Another notable thing about this album is that it doesn't feature Martin Barre, who's a big presence in many Tull records on guitar. He's not involved in this one, so it's a different lineup of musicians. Ian Anderson takes the helm for a lot of it, with flute, guitar, mandolin, harmonica, vocals, all kinds of different instruments. Joe Parrish is on guitars, John O'Hara on orchestral arrangements and such, piano, keyboards, and accordion, Scott Hammond on drums and percussion, and David Goodyear on bass and double bass. So that's kind of the lineup we've got on this album. Another interesting part of the album is it's kind of divided in my mind between some more electric band, full band rock compositions, and then several acoustic numbers that I believe were written a little bit later in the process and were mostly developed and recorded by Ian Anderson on his own, with some input from the band members from afar, because this was during the pandemic era where they couldn't get together and do much, but they were able to send their parts over. And so there are other band members included, but those tracks are mostly acoustic based. And so it's kind of interesting, the dichotomy. They're all mixed together, but you can definitely hear which tracks are more band focused and which ones are more of that acoustic side of, maybe even leaning more into the Ian Anderson solo kind of feel to the record. The concept behind the record is pretty interesting. Ian Anderson, when he began conceptualizing the album, was thinking about different emotions and traits of people. And so he wrote kind of these words down of different human emotions and traits, and ended up looking them up in the Bible, essentially, to kind of see what the Bible had to say about each of these different emotions and traits, to kind of prove a jumping off point for the lyrics behind the album. And so it kind of takes these biblical stories and themes and brings them a little bit into the modern era. And so it's a very clever way of writing, and I think his lyrics are always on point in all of these Jethro Tull albums. I'm not really a huge lyrics guy. I don't really focus in on the lyrics a ton, but I really appreciate the cleverness, the wit, the kind of meaning behind Ian Anderson and his writing, because I think it's really well done. So wanted to mention that as definitely an interesting feature. Pointing out some of the tracks on the album, Mrs. Tibbetts, that opens the album, is a serviceable opening rocker with kind of that typical Jethro Tull feel, some signature flute, which is all over the album. You can't have a Tull record without some great flute playing, and that's definitely a feature on a large portion of this album, certainly. I feel like the production suffers a little bit, especially in this track, and in various parts of the album, so it leaves a little bit to be desired, but you can tell there's something really fun and cool in the instrumentation and in what they're doing. I just wish it sounded a little bit better and was mixed a little bit better, perhaps, but just a minor complaint. It's still a good song, and there's definitely cool things going on in the mix. I love Mine is the Mountain, which is the third track on the album. Just has this kind of dramatic piano and this affected vocal from Ian Anderson before the band kicks in with some more instrumental flourishes, but it's a bit haunting and slow. It kind of details this story of like Moses and God speaking to Moses, and it's really interesting how it's approached, and the vocal affectation and kind of the chorus or the main melody line of Mine is the Mountain done in this kind of odd falsetto voice. It's really different and interesting, and it really perked my attention when I listened to the album. It's really cool. There's some great proggy-ish instrumental moments with some great flute playing once again, and some great piano in the mix. So it's a really cool track that I definitely really loved when I was listening through to the album. Then we get to kind of this trio of singles that was released before the album. The Zealot Gene, which is a solid rocker. Maybe not one of my favorite picks from the album, but very solid, very fun, and definitely sticks in my head, the kind of catchy melodies. Shoshana Sleeping to me is a little bit better. Great folky feel, kind of some catchy flute and guitar riffs. A little bit of a darker kind of feel to this, but very interestingly written and really perks my attention. And then Sad City Sisters kind of is a good piece that kind of evokes that acoustic feel towards the album. There's even some accordion, it sounds like, in the music. Just brings back that folky kind of feel from the 70s classic era. And I found going through their catalog that I kind of like it when they lean into the folk flavor of their music, when they do more acoustic instruments, acoustic guitar, mandolin, and of course the flute on top of that is just a great feel for me of instrumentation. It just brings this kind of classic vibe, this kind of folky, woodsy kind of quality that I just really love from the band. I think they really excel at that. So all of those more acoustic-based songs on this really shine to me. That's some of my favorite stuff. There's kind of a trio towards the end of the album of these kind of folkier, acoustic-type songs. Where Did Saturday Go?, Three Loves 3, and In Brief Visitation. They kind of, especially Three Loves 3 and In Brief Visitation, almost run right next to each other. I almost thought they were the same song, but they're two different ones. Some pretty acoustic guitar playing, great flute lines, some great vocal spotlights. Of course, like I said, these are the tracks that Ian Anderson kind of did mostly on his own solo, with getting some long distance tracks from the bandmates to kind of round out the sound. But a lot of the core writing and the core instrumentation and stuff that you hear on the record is Ian Anderson kind of putting that together by himself. And so I think those lead to feeling more classic, feeling more like this is the 70s period of the band and what they were doing at the height of their powers back in those days. But there's a lot of interesting tracks beyond those. The Betrayal of Joshua Kind I thought was really fascinating. More of a band track with some sparkling bluesy kind of piano work with a cool, interesting flute line over that. A lot of potential there. Really like Baron Beth, Wild Desert John, another pleasant song with those folky influences. Great lilting vocals and backing strings, and some driving instrumentation. So what more could you ask for? So it's a really consistent record. You know, like I said, I wish some of it was mixed maybe a bit differently. I feel like sometimes the guitars sound a little bit harsh when that doesn't quite make sense towards the album having this folkier feel. Ian Anderson's vocals can sometimes be an acquired taste for me, and I wish I could hear his more powerful singing voice that you hear from his earlier days. But, for what we have now, of course he's older and this is just his capabilities, and I'm glad to have it. I'd rather have this than no Jethro Tull. So all in all, I'm positive about the album. I think it's really good. It'll probably slot somewhere right smack dab in the middle of the album rankings, I would imagine. But it's a really solid album and shows, what's really cool is that these legacy bands are still kicking and still doing new music. I think that's really exciting because they could just rest on their laurels. They could go out touring and just play their classic big material that everyone wants to hear. They could just play the hits, but that they focus on new material and are still creative and are still trying to come up with new things. That means a lot, I think, and shows their artistic integrity. And, there's a lot of bands doing this. Yes, with their recent album, The Quest. Styx had a fantastic album last year that I really adored. So it's cool seeing these legacy bands have this new material that stands up. Maybe it's not better than their classics and their material, but it stands up, with that material. It stands up as a good companion piece and really showcases an artist that's trying to explore new things, trying to bring their perspective into more modern storytelling and modern kind of ideas. So I really appreciate it for that aspect. So really, really pleased with this record, and I think it's a strong one that you guys should check out, especially if you're Jethro Tull fans or like maybe the folkier feel of your prog music. So thank you guys for watching. Hopefully you guys are having a good time out there or enjoying the music that you're listening to and finding some good new stuff. There's so much great new music coming out this year. I'm really excited to continue talking about it and spotlighting these great albums. Please subscribe if you haven't yet. I plan these album reviews come about pretty often, weekly usually, depending on what's out there and what's being released. So I'd appreciate you guys subscribing so you can keep apprised of all of the new music that's coming out and the things that I think are worthy of recommending. Hopefully a lot of you have similar tastes to me. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments about how you feel about this album and your impressions of it. Is it a strong Jethro Tull record? How does it compare to their 70s material? Where would you rank it in their catalog? Things of that nature. And I'll be coming back next week with a album ranking show to give you my full thoughts of their whole catalog, which should be a lot of fun. So thank you guys again, and I'm really appreciative of all your support. And I'll hopefully see you guys in another video. Bye.